Hey folks, welcome to the first Gateway API meeting for the year of what is it? Common Era 2026. Um, and Here we are back again with another round of exciting Gateway API stuff this year, I'm sure. As always, this is a Kubernetes meeting. We abide by the Kubernetes Code of Conduct, which loosely translates to be excellent to each other. Um, we'll leave the party on dudes for at KubeCon though. Okay. Yeah. So first up, we've got Keith. Over to you.
All right, thank you. Nick, since you're host, do you want to share the agenda at all, or for me to? How do you
Yes,
want
I
to do
will.
that?
I will.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so just want to echo happy 2026, everybody. I figured new year, good time to talk about a new potential resource. And specifically, it was brought up in a previous meeting about some of the work that we're doing in Working Group AI Gateway, where we're trying to do egress for sort of the Gateway API ecosystem. And as part of that, we have started tossing around this idea of this backend resource. We talked about it at a very high level a couple meetings ago before the sort of the holiday break. But I wanted to bring it back up to discuss the TLS aspect specifically. So Ricardo gave me some wonderful feedback before the holidays, and I wanted to bring it up here pretty early on because apparently there is some movement in the TLS route space and back in TLS policy space that's going to be end up becoming relevant here. Um, so just going to refresh some context for folks who might not be as familiar. So this backend resource is um, meant to sort of be represents the backend role of a Kubernetes service, of an external FQDN, et cetera. And the way that a user would use it would be as a backend ref to an HTTP route, a gRPC route, et cetera. Um, and one of the things that we talked about a bit at the last time I brought this up here was around the idea of inlining TLS policy versus using the existing backend TLS policy. Um, I don't want to necessarily open up that conversation. We didn't completely flesh it out, but for the sake of sort of chasing this inline policy trail as far as we can, want to try to not get wrapped up in that discussion. And instead, I want to see what the implications are of inlining the TLS policy versus using the backend TLS policy resource. So in this proposal, you'll see that the TLS field is being inlined here. Specifically, you've got TLS purport that users can specify. Um, and there's a lot of it's a somewhat long proposal and there's a lot of stuff in there, but specifically, Nick, if you'll scroll down just a little bit to the TLS policy heading, and right below that there's that a note on the evolution of TLS within Gateway API. So as I point out here, TLS within Gateway API sort of has a bunch of different resources, or lives in several different resources, and they all capture a little bit different aspects of it. I'm realizing that the link I put here is a little bit stale. I put a link to the Get 29 something. The TLS memorandum Get is in the latest version, so apologies if the link is old. But I try to walk through it at a high level here about the different TLS fields. You've got the listener level TLS or front end TLS. You've got gateway spec TLS that, as I understand it, is pretty much just for MTLS for when the gateway is acting as the client, and then also when the client starts being sent to the gateway. You've got TLS route to handle TLS termination, pass through, et cetera. And then back in TLS policy for setting SNI, SAND, et cetera. Um, so I guess that's the context that I want to set. I love to spend the rest of time boxes at 10, 15 minutes or so. The rest of the time on this topic, sort of talking about the ramifications of this. If we've got this backend resource has TLS policy inline that can do MTLS as a backend draft for HTTP route. What does that mean for maybe some things that are in flight? Ricardo specifically mentions that there is, and I can't remember off the top of my head right now, but there is some duplication. Oh, the Gateway Spec TLS is potentially heading for standard channel in this next release. Um, that means we need to figure out some a priority, or maybe it means we end up just making this back into us policy if this exists. So for folks who are more up to date with the current state of TLS and Gateway API, I would love to have a discussion and hear some input and feedback on the feasibility of what I propose here. All right, Rob, you've got a hand.
I just want to make sure I'm not going out of bounds here. So what you are trying to avoid in this discussion is policy versus inline, and you would prefer just staying on, like, assuming this is inline, what are the ramifications? Is that
Yes, because I think
okay?
it would be very valid for us to get to a place where we say, hey, inline is too hard for these reasons. We're going to end up doing policy. But I want to be able to understand and articulate what those reasons are
Yeah.
versus going right to that question immediately.
Yep, makes sense. Yep, okay. Thank you. Thank you for raising this. I had every intent of spending time looking at this today and failed miserably. What I would say is, Gateway TLS is confusing. It's configured in so many places, without getting into the policy or not. More places to configuring it is going to be a challenge, a complexity challenge. Like, kind of like you're already saying it's fractured. We're potentially splintering further. Um, One of the things I was chatting with John past couple weeks sometime about is the idea that the identity. So right now, what gateway.spec.tls.backend does is it specifies a client cert that should be used when communicating to any backend. And you can look at that for like 2 seconds and realize that's not enough, right? Because sure, that you can have a default, and that is what that is. But you're going to want to be able to configure that per gateway backend pair. And one of the fundamental, I don't want to say problems, but challenges with backend TLS policy is that it's not necessarily gateway backend pair. It's like, or client backend pair. It's just, here's a backend, and this applies to any client that wants to talk to the backend, and that gets real confusing. I don't have an obvious solution to that. I don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole. But like, one of the things, thinking out loud, that we were talking about is, like, if you could, specify additional fields on backend TLS policy if and only if the target refs or whatever were unique to a single backend. Like, if there was some way of saying this only applies to this specific client or this set of clients, right? Like, maybe that helps. So I'm not really, I guess, talking about limitations of your API. I'm just talking about problems that we already have not solved well, and how they could potentially layer with problems in this additional backend layer. I don't know. I don't know if, like, that's not really super helpful, I recognize, but I just, yeah, I just wanted to throw out some of the complexities that we're currently dealing with. Even if this goes GA, spec TLS backend goes GA, it is a very incomplete solution. And this will not be the only thing that finds flaws in it, I guess. Sorry, Nick, go ahead.
So yeah, I think the sort of the main question you're asking here, Keith, is like, should you be looking like, what's the deal with policy or not policy here? I think that as Rob said, backend TLS policy, while I think it's actually not too bad a design, it does have a lot of issues that we had to trade off on. Um, the biggest ones that I found as I've been implementing it are that the conflict resolution for it and determining if a backend TLS policy is relevant for a specific gateway is a very complicated calculation. Because we have multiple target refs and target refs have section names, determining if a particular service is or is not like a target ref for a backend for a valid backend TLS policy is actually really complicated. Yeah, when I did it in Cilium, it took me like probably 1,000 lines of code to sort it out because you have to check a bunch of partial intersections. What happens if you've got two backend TLS policies, one of which points at all of the sections in a service and one of which only points at one? Do they conflict or not? You've got to actually find all of those cases and handle every single one of those cases. And this is actually a sort of more general problem with policy that, because one of the reasons why I wanted to keep generally policy limited to a single target ref originally was to sort of get rid of that possibility. I you I reluctantly acquiesced because people were like, we need to target more things and having more policies is going to be just as bad. But like you know there's all of those problems about like target calculation, plus then sort of the general problems about discoverability of policy. One of the things I like about the inline method is that when you're creating a backend, you create all of the settings are in the place where you created them. It does mean that the settings can be in more places, but the thing to me the plus is that when you are setting the settings to do with this, most of them are in places you care about, either in this backend or in the relevant gateway. Like you already know you care about those things, and so you probably should go and look at them. So it's less overhead than having a detached policy resource that sort of acts at a distance. To me, that like all I'm saying there is I reckon you should give it a go and see how it works. Is sort of my feeling there. Like because you're doing an experimental first. Do it in experimental. See what it's like to use. Like that is actually valuable feedback. Um, because I know for sure that it's really hard to implement back into this policy, and I think that once folks start implementing it and as we tighten down the conformance test for backend TLS policy more for the main use case, it's going to sort of become clearer to folks that like actually doing this is pretty hard. And so yeah, I'm really worried about that. So yeah. Anyway, Rob, you are next.
Yeah, sorry. I'll keep this brief, but I realized I failed to connect the dots in what I was saying to this proposal. But what Nick was saying kind of reminded me that basically having everything configured on the back end is very convenient, but it doesn't really work great in in our persona model where like just hear me out for a second. You have 3 different clients that are all going to be talking to a backend. If you want to say this client should use this cert to talk to me and this client should use this cert to talk to me, like that's complete inversion of roles and concerns. Like that's not right, right? Something has gone wrong here. And so one of the ideas with backend TLS policy is because it's a layer removed, it could theoretically be owned by a client instead of a application, right? An app owner. We have made the persona that owns backend TLS policy is incredibly vague right now. He said, well, it could be whoever you want it to be. It could be the application owner. It could be the gateway owner, the client, whoever, right? But because it's a separate resource, it does give you some flexibility in who controls that thing. If defining something like a certificate that a client should use to connect is meaningful or useful at this API, that's something to consider when it comes to inlining. Yeah, I'll leave it there.
So I'm really glad you went there, Rob, because and I was planning to try to like plant the seed for the next conversation, but you brought it up, and I think it's really relevant here. So, Nick, if you wouldn't mind scrolling up uh, a section or two to the produce right there, a little bit lower, too far. Producer consumer role is the heading. Yeah, producer versus consumer role. So one of the things that to that persona question, as I was designing this, I ran into the exact same question that you just brought up, Rob. Is like, what is the persona here? And this wasn't, to be clear, we're still sort of discussing. Well, I'll add some context from the working group, AI Gateway working group. We're at the point we're going to start prototyping. I'm working on a prototype in a branch right now and start trying to prove this out. Um, but as we were going through this, like as we were discussing, it didn't sound intuitive. But as we talked about it, and as I was thinking through it, I think this is right. I think the backend resource should be purely consumer. And I don't know. I might be crazy in thinking that. There might be a basic use case that I'm just not thinking about here. Um, but I think that making backend a purely sort of consumer side resource is what's going to help with some of the persona confusion and also help to sort of provide a guideline for what belongs sort of in the resource versus not. So, for example, like there shouldn't be a cluster VIP for this backend, which talking to some people, like it felt like, oh, a backend should have a cluster VIP, but no, that's a front end. Like this is going to be solely sort of a bag of endpoints sort of resource. Um, and so what you're essentially saying in that scenario, Rob, if we sort of take that consumer idea and reframe it, what I think that the backend resource is saying for the gateway, it's not a producer side API for here's how you talk to my service. It's actually the service owner it's sort of a federated shared ownership model where the app owner, because there is some trust between the app owner and the gateway owner. So the app owner sort of helping the gateway owner saying, hey, here's how you should behave as a client to my service. And that's a backend resource. Versus saying, creating this endpoint for my service saying, here's how you talk to me. Because that has some security concerns as well when it comes to what search should be used and all those sorts of things. Um, I think my general point in saying this is one, yeah, that we this the proposal talks about the producer consumer role and the personas, and then two, to Nick's point, I think we are going to sort of try this out and see where it gets us. I think my goal in bringing it up here is to, like if it's already a foregone conclusion that some TLS things there's already duplication for TLS here, I want to know that early so that we can pivot early and adopt those changes and make sure we're not running in a direction where there's already something in Gateway API standard that's going to conflict with something we're doing in backend. Um, it doesn't. Maybe it's sounding like. Correct me if I'm wrong. That's not necessarily the case at this point. That there are some rough edges even with a standard version of Gateway TLS backend, etc. So I think if I'm reading that correctly, we might just I'm probably going to just keep going full steam ahead and prototype this thing out. But yeah, we've got a lot of hands and maybe not a lot of time. So Lior, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Kate. I think generally +1 to most of the things that you said. I mean, mainly I think it's important to support both cases. I mean, for like producer and consumer, not necessarily for backend. It's very much resonates to me that the backend is only consumer side, and I have read this section. One of the things I do want to bring up, which feels like this is the thing that you're actually interested in bringing up to this group, is that back then when backend TLS policy gap was kind of finalized, and when John jumped in and everything, there was a PR which I don't think ended up being merged, but like about how backend TLS policy changes to backend TLS policy to actually make the backend TLS policy also being able to do consumer side things. And I think also I remember like conversations with Rob and John about like how can we make that work. There was some namespace discussion. I mean, I'm not sure if you were part of them or not, but like it's worth discussing those because I think there were some some solid ideas about it. I'm not saying it's better or not, but it's obviously different because, like why TLS should be defined specifically on a different resource and not be a policy. Obviously, that's the policy versus not policy discussion, but like just want to bring it up because if we are to standardize on Beckett TLS, and also there was this main concern that obviously started this conversation about like another friction point. Maybe it's worth kind of bringing this at least as an alternative and kind of discuss on it. I'm also happy to kind of dig back the exact semantics we standardized on, at least with John. It was kind of a future scope, but like how do we basically make backend TLS policy also being treated as consumer?
So I do have my hand up, but I just wanted to jump in with that topic. I think one of the biggest problems we have with backend TLS policy was that when Candice and I were working on it originally, we conceived of it solely as a producer thing. And a lot of other people who were working on it but as not as closely involved also thought of it as a consumer thing. And so that is where a lot of the friction arose, was that we were like, but this is a producer thing only. And then people were like, but if we add consumer things to it, it'd also be very useful. So there was definitely a bunch of friction there about producer and consumer roles in back-end TLS policy. I still lean on the fact that it's mainly a producer side thing, and I think that we need to be very careful about adding consumer side things to it. We have some already. SANS and S&I stuff is kind of client-ish because it's talking about the things that you need to check in the certificate you get, rather than being about, yeah. So, but like that's a bit of a gray area. But like the specifying client certificates, in that, to me, kind of obviates the point of TLS entirely, because then you have a producer thing that is specifying both sides of the TLS conversation, essentially.
But the key here, Nick, was that it was necessary. I meant like without getting too deep into this, but like regardless of what's more useful, which I kind of tends to agree that I think most production deployments or whatever, like the producer will define the backend TLS policy and say, okay, our things should talk to me. But I think the key here was that like it's a lot of time useful to actually let the client decide what it want to use, some TLS that it wants to use to initiate the connection, and I think that's where the discussion went.
Yeah, I think, and what we ended up doing there is that's what the spec TLS backend part is on Gateway, is about saying, hey, like when you originate a TLS connection, here are the details you should, like the gateway you should use as a client. The and like I think that was where we ended up settling on, like putting the client stuff, so that because the and we have a way in that back end thing for it to target specific, like to be more than just the entire gateway or for every possible back end. Yeah, anyway, but I've talked too much. Sorry, Rob.
Yeah, I you highlighted, the key distinction that I guess we keep on all circling around, the consumer versus producer distinction. And I have been responsible for a lot of the movement towards consumer in back-end TLS policy, for better or worse, because I think I've always thought of it as more of a consumer policy, because it's ultimately describing how a consumer should connect to a backend. But I know it's, we're talking about the connection in between a consumer and a producer, right? So you can see how there's a little bit of both there. I am open to trying this. I am very supportive of whatever we do here being consumer first, because I think that is the greatest need. And this is particularly interesting because the case of AI Gateway, as I understand it, is, almost exclusively egress outside of the cluster. And so you are kind of by definition consumer only. So that does make it simpler. Whereas for a lot of what we've done historically in Gateway, you have the consumer and producer existing within the same cluster, and you need to find a way to potentially serve both. So yeah, I think that distinction for this use case is important. Yeah, I've talked a lot. Phil has not, so let me hand off to Phil.
Yeah, so thanks, and I'm sorry I joined a little late. Somehow the invite dropped off my calendar. So I have to admit I'm just a little confused by the way, the language keeps switching around from consumer and producer and client and server, and especially because what we have in the middle is essentially a proxy, right? A thing that is the back end TLS policy is, if I understand it correctly, right, is from essentially the gateway to the back end, right, the service or whatever you've defined. It strikes me that first in terms of persona, like if you want to specify how you reach, what certificate you use to reach my backend, you specify that in the thing that tells you what backend to go to, which is a route. If you do it at the gateway level, it's a different persona because you could have different, you can have routes to a bunch of different backends from a gateway. And so I think the way that you manage who the persona is what you're attaching, a policy to. And first, and then second, in the context of AI, where you're talking about egressing traffic, I don't think you want to turn backend TLS policy into both a policy for when you are, ingressing and it's from the gateway to your backend, and then also use it for egressing traffic. So, I mean, we've talked about using like an egress gateway, a different type of gateway. Is that not a viable approach for this, for the egress? And then you would have different TLS that you would apply for your egress versus the TLS that you apply for your ingress.
So quickly answering
Just
that, that's
yeah.
what this proposal is. This proposal is for the egress gateway flow, and we sort of discuss. I'm trying. I think unsuccessfully to try to move quickly in the AI use cases within the AI working group, and then within Gateway API have sort of the more deliberation about how this evolves within Gateway API, within Kubernetes more generally. What does this mean, et cetera. But if you're thinking specifically in the egress use case, then like, yes, we are trying to solve this egressing out of the cluster where you've got traffic that gets to an egress gateway somehow. You can, your typical gateway TLS is going to handle the egress gateway, like the service to the egress gateway TLS. But then you've got to figure out sort of what certificate should that gateway use going to the FQDN outside the cluster, going to the IP address outside the cluster. And that's where this backend resource is meant to provide a place to keep that information.
But isn't it dangerous to call it a backend on egress?
Well,
I mean, a backend means something that's
definitions.
back behind. Yeah.
So this is one of the cases where the reuse of the gateway terminology can be confusing because it's true that in an egress gateway context, an external thing is a backend. That's because there is a difference in the meaning of the word gateway when you're using it in an ingress context to when you're using it in an egress context. When you're using it in an egress context, a gateway takes traffic that does not know about cluster internals and translates it to traffic that does know about cluster internals. That's, so that it knows about cluster backends that are running inside the cluster. When you're doing an egress gateway, you're actually doing the exact opposite thing. You're taking traffic that does know about cluster internals and specifically stripping it of information about cluster internals and turning it into sort of, as far as the other end is concerned, some random person on the internet. So it's correct in gateway terms to call it a backend, but when you're thinking about this in an ingress context, it's completely misleading because this is not a backend in the ingress context at all. I actually think it may be worth to like it may be worth, Keith, to make this extremely explicit. It may be worth naming this thing as a egress backend or a, or a egress point or something, egress something or other, right? Like egress target or maybe or something like that, right? Like, you know, so that then it's distinct. It uses a distinct word and so you can know that the word is different, the behavior is different, so that we don't end up with this specific confusion. I think it's completely reasonable confusion to have, to be clear, Philip. Like I do think that your confusion about producer versus consumer, client, and server is also reasonable. The reason why we use those different words is because we are describing things that are subtly different. In many cases, the consumer, when you're talking about TLS, the consumer of a service is the client, and the producer of the service is the server most of the time. However, once you put a proxy in the middle, then it becomes confusing because the consumer of the service may be the original service or it might be the proxy, depending on exactly the flow that you're talking about. In the same case, the client could be the original server or the original client, or it could be the proxy. And so it's we've used different words there because they're describing slightly different things. And it's why I often will pull people up and be like, excuse me, please explain which client you mean, because it's very important in TLS to make sure that you're being clear as to if you're talking about like an external client, like an actual client, or proxy as client, or in this case, an internal client, and then TLS interception proxy as client when it is egressing out to the thing, because that's what we're talking about here most of the time, is that we're talking about intercepting TLS, maybe terminating it, and then reopening a new TLS connection, which is the definition of a TLS man in the middle attack, which is fine in this case because that's what we're intending to do. But like as far from the point of view of the TLS protocol, that we are performing a man in the middle attack, right? Like that is what that thing is doing. When you are terminating a TLS connection that is bound for outside the cluster, inside the cluster, you are doing a man in the middle attack.
Well,
That's
it depends if you're using the reverse proxy, right, or the forward proxy.
So if you're terminating the TLS connection at a place that is not the original destination, then that is a man in the middle attack, right? And sometimes you have to do that, right? Like sometimes you have to do that to do many of the things that you want to be able to do for for AI training workloads, for AI agent workloads and stuff. You need to terminate a connection that is TLS to be able to look at what's happening in the connection. If you want to be able to do like context-based routing using the body of the message, you must have an unencrypted body to be able to do that. So you need to terminate the TLS. So you need blah blah blah, right? Like, and if you want to look at the headers for other types of traffic, you need to have an unencrypted connection. So you need to terminate TLS. In many cases, using a TLS style SNI route is not acceptable because you need more information about the HTTP metadata. So and I'm saying man in the middle attack because that is the technically correct thing. I'm not using that as a loaded language about like whether or not it's desirable. Like it's technically correct to say it is that. And so that was just me sort of trying to explain to Philip, like, yes, it's very important to be very clear about your terminology when you're talking this TLS stuff, because it is very easy for people to get the wrong idea. And as you can see, even amongst us who have been working on backend TLS policy for over 3 years, we've still got people we've still got disagreement amongst everybody about exactly what backend TLS policy is for. And that really flags how tricky it is to make sure everyone's on the same page for this sort of stuff and how important it is as well. Sorry, Leo.
No, that's fine. I mean, that's great. I mean, I guess just to relate to your point before, I wanted to just one quick question. Keith, correct me if I'm wrong. As far as I read the proposal, it was only targeting reverse proxy model, which means like you're gonna actually call the gateway, right? And therefore you gonna terminate the TLS there. Is that still the case?
Yeah, so the current scope is the reverse proxy model. We're not doing like where the specific endpoints are defined in the proxy. We're not doing sort of a dynamic forward proxy use case yet. We think that's valuable, but we want to start with sort of the more
But I guess
The
my
easier
question
one, yeah.
related to the man-in-the-middle terminology, like my question is like in your scenario, the clients would call the gateway address, right?
Correct.
Right.
Either through a
Yeah.
mesh sort of thing or manually. Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. Anyway, so I think like where I wanted to steer this discussion is like, did I hear correctly? Um, like I'm trying to understand because in my mind, like backend is actually, I mean, maybe a different name, but like I think it's actually is useful to not distinguish between something like a egress backend or something because like it is useful in my opinion. Maybe I'm missing some of the arguments to have backend as a way to also select things inside a cluster.
It's a terrible idea because you cannot use FQDN safely inside a cluster because FQDN inside a cluster allows you to bypass namespace restrictions very easily.
Not. I want to push a little bit against that, and that's actually where I have my hand up. So part of the possibly very naive ambition here is to pretend, and I was talking with Mike about this right before break. But part of the possibilities of this resource, if we don't genericize it to just egress, is to potentially have a sort of successor to the bag of endpoints role of service, um, where we could do things like inline TLS policy and so for gateway implementations, for mesh implementations, have a thing that can be a bag of endpoints that your some endpoint size controller can create endpoint sizes for. That could potentially work for multi-cluster things, etc. Um, how do you do FQDN safely in the cluster? Well, if you notice, like this resource does not define a VIP. There's no DNS part of this. That's the wrong place for all of that. In fact, so, I forget where exactly in the proposal, but in the proposal, we start talking about how this could evolve. We propose a front end resource that is cluster scoped and has a much different persona than this namespace oriented backend resource to prevent some of those exact same security scenarios that you're talking about. And so that's sort of down the line, or maybe not. Mike and I are talking about maybe starting a KEP this year. We'll see how this all sort of ends up happening. But I do want to make sure that I'm clear about this. This is purely that backup endpoints back end aspect of service. And because of that, and because of where we think it could potentially go in the ecosystem more generally, I'd like to try to avoid pigeonholing it to just FQDN or just egress.
So I think I understand the goal, and it is reasonable to want to like have a way to handle the bucket of backends and the bucket of endpoints problem. I think the problem, the thing that you've got to be really careful about is that using a host name as a coordination point is very dangerous because a host name is not like a safe thing to use because it can point to other, it can be like a pointer to a pointer to a pointer, right? So, like it's never guaranteed to just be a host name, right? Like when you say FQDN, you can have it do service name.service.namespace.cluster.local, right? Or if you know the cluster IP of a thing, then you can, using an external name server, have a host name record that points to your internal cluster thing, right? Like it's never safe to use a host name as a point to coordinate two resources inside the same cluster, right? Like if you're inside the same cluster and you have two resources, they need to refer to objects, not indirectly via a host name. It's very important because a host name is not safe. It's like passing it's passing unsanitized user data directly to your program, right? Like it's not safe.
Right, I agree. It's an injection risk essentially.
Yeah,
Is
100%.
the attack? Yeah,
Yeah,
and I think
it's a very strong injection risk, and so it's very important to keep that in mind anytime you're using FQDN. I think in the case that you got here, it's fine because like especially like I think it's very important in that FQDN field you need to say and that implementations must not accept
Yes.
the local cluster host name, like domain
Yes.
space in this field. And it should be expected that implementations will look up the cluster host name because it doesn't have to be cluster local. You can change it.
Yep.
Like you can the so yeah, I mean the concern is for external host names as well, or like but that is an accepted risk, right? Like everybody knows that you can have a host name point to any IP, right? Like I can take in my home DNS server, I can intercept google.com and point it anywhere I like, right? Like
Right.
and once you're out on the wider internet though, it's much harder to do that because there's more stuff. DNSSEC is designed to mitigate that risk. And there's a bunch of other workarounds in place, but like people know it's a known and well understood risk. Inside a cluster, hanging things off an FQDN is not a well understood risk, and so that's why I call it out every time I see it. That's why we specifically exclude external name services from Gateway API stuff because of that
Yep.
risk, right?
Yep.
Is that Rob? That link you posted, is that the CVE?
Yeah, I mean it's actually like the CVE is for endpoints, and then there's an additional advisory, which is the relevant one
Yep.
inside that CVE, and that talks about external name services. But honestly, they're both very closely related. The idea is that you send a it doesn't matter what kind of FQDN it does. It doesn't matter what kind of domain it is, as long as there's some layer of indirection, and especially if the thing that is reading that is different than your local permissions. There's also the whole confused deputy part of this too. Like
Mhm.
I can't see X, but you can. Show
Yep.
me that, please. Right. And so that is, or and some of the common things would be like localhost. I know with this one in particular, a non-trivial set of ingress controllers, allowed this to access localhost.
Yep. And because again, localhost is one where the confused deputy and sort of problem is particularly bad for a proxy, because if your proxy has any network capable control mechanisms that only run on localhost because hey, nobody can get to localhost because it's running in a container, and you allow FQDNs, now anybody can get to anything on localhost because you can specify either localhost directly, or if you are smart enough to have
A DNS
things that
server.
stop
Yep.
localhost dot local domain, then you just need to stand up a DNS record somewhere that points, localhost dot somedomain.com to 127.0.0.1, right? Like, and then you can look up, you can find it, you can connect to any port you can define on the localhost. So that's all of those things are reasons why using an FQDN, you have to be super careful. You need to make sure that people who are using FQDNs know that that there is a risk, and that proxies that any proxy that is doing that must not have a control surface running on localhost, right? So if you allow external name like FQDN setting at any point and a user to specify targets via an FQDN, it is important that your proxy must not have any control stuff running on a network available port that is available on localhost. Any control stuff you do on your proxy must be done via domain sockets or some other non-network mechanism. Otherwise, you are vulnerable to like a confused deputy style attack. Contour had a CVE about this when I was involved in Contour as well. So, sorry. I think it's just we spent a lot of time on this, but I do think that one in particular is really important to call out. Leo, did you want to add something more before we
No,
try
I
and get
just
to the rest
wanted
of things?
just wanted to time check. I see two more people have some agenda items, but yeah, I think
Yep.
it's pretty useful. I think,
Yep.
like Keith, you tell us if there's anything, but
Yeah, no, I think I got what I needed on the FQDN stuff. I think that there are, especially with backend only, we're not coordinating with FQDN, which I think is the important piece here. It's a thing the data plane is reading. So I will,
do you mind
as
adding
we
this? Do you mind adding this like distinction to the proposal, so for posterity as well?
Yes, I will talk about some of the risks of FQDN things, and I'll also point to prior art for things like Istio, Envoy Gateway, et cetera, who do this in a safe way, and talk about why it's distinct from that CVE that Rob linked. But
great.
yeah, I appreciate it. If anybody's got any other concerns, you're free to reach out to me via Slack or come to the working group AI Gateway. Um, I'm guessing we're gonna continue moving forward on this, and we'll come back when we've got other questions or something to report.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, man. Stephen.
Yeah, I just wanted to provide some status updates
Yep.
on Ingress to Gateway. I've been kind of going forward and implementing a bunch of stuff.
Awesome.
There's also a community member who's contributing a good amount.
Cool. Yeah,
Most of them are pretty straightforward, I think. The only one that's kind of interesting is timeouts.
Right.
Because it seems to be one of the more popular ones, but it doesn't translate well. Because
sorry to laugh, man. Like, the reason I laugh is that timeouts took us so long to do because proxies don't translate very well, like between timeouts. A lot of them are very slightly and
8 or
subtly
9
different.
months or so solving the Sync Gateway API the first time.
Yep.
Yeah, so Ingress Nginx only has TCP level stuff. Gateway API only has HTTP level stuff. The exact semantics don't translate, but I think the idea does.
Okay.
I talked to Rob a little bit about it, and I think we can just do a best shot and then let the user know, hey, this is what we did. Take a look. You may want to do something slightly different.
You might want to twiddle things a little bit. Yeah, I think that's probably the best we can do. Yeah.
The TLS, or not, sorry, not TLS. The time we're talking about TLS too much. The timeouts gap also has a ton of historical context around different proxy implementations that might be really helpful for figuring out how to map this.
Particularly because I think we did look at Nginx timeouts and how they translated. So it might be worth having a look at the timeouts gap there, because since most of the use we're talking about here is translating from Ingress Nginx.
I'll drop the link in chat.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Yeah, that's it. Right now, all my PRs are not passing the lens, but they will be by tomorrow. I am 90% sure. But that's it.
Steven, do you need any help there, or is there anything that we should pay attention to?
I don't. Yeah, that's it. I mean, I realized I wrote them all. I put them all out today, so I'm not too rushed about it. But I just wanted to let people have this on people's radar and let the community know kind of what the state of the project is.
It's outstanding, man. It's great to see so much, so much activity. Great to see so much work there. I really appreciate it.
Thanks.
Yeah, same. Thank you, Steven.
Of course.
Okay. So the last thing is me. Before I went on the break, I put up this PR that Rob had some great feedback on, that I have actions. This adds some new terminology documentation to the concepts section. Hang on, let me pull up the preview since we're. So it adds a bunch of some extra text in the API overview stage. Particularly, it adds some language around sort of using words that we use in other parts of the documentation, so that people get a chance to see us use those things for reals. When in one of the first times they read about it. So yeah, distinctiveness in particular. Distinct listeners and things like that, specific rules there. And then the other one that's important is I have called out in a couple of places here that about traffic matching. And there is actually a separate page here that calls out that you can't sort of match a listener, and then if there's no matches, sort of fall through to another listener. Once you matched a listener, you're stuck on that listener. And there are good reasons for that, and talk about some of them here. But but this one has been one that a lot of people is surprising to people, particularly people who are used to using Nginx, which does not generally, unless you really work at it hard, it generally ends up serializing things to a big list of rules. So if you miss one, you can fall through to another one. That is specifically not how things work for Gateway API. The last thing that I added here is a page about troubleshooting and status. In particular, talking about how you should always check the status, and in particular, look for conditions. Because that is a thing that I still have people who are new to Gateway API be surprised about. People are used to using just kubectl get to find out things. and there's just too much status for us to fit in one line, unfortunately. So Gateway Kettle or kubectl get OYAML are the way to go. So yes, I'd appreciate some reviews on that one. I've got a rough draft of another PR that is going to just I'm not sure exactly where it's going to end up being, if it's going to be a memorandum GEP or not. I'll write the text first and then figure out where we put it afterwards. But the next doc that I'm going to be writing is about hostname intersection, with and sort of an additional part being talking about how non-gateway implementations should consume hostname. That's particularly relevant to Cert Manager and to external DNS, both of whom are working on stuff for both gateway support and for listener set support. So I really want to get that done sooner rather than later, so that it's done before we make any further updates to listener set, sort of in an official release. And so that as I know the Cert Manager folks are intending to start work on listener set support now. So I'm really hoping to get that one done soon, so that we've got some better docs for people about what the hostname field means, how it works, and how you should consume it when you're a gateway integration. That's the word from the implementations page. So yeah, please take a look at that. Happy to take any questions.
This is very awesome, and thank you. First off, as per usual, I have nothing but nitpicks. But no, this is great. The only thing I saw, since you pulled up the deploy preview, is I have no idea how to order the things on the left, right? Because like we have it almost alphabetical, but there's a couple things that aren't alphabetical. I don't think it should really be alphabetical, but I also don't know how or why we should order things in there. But
I kind of put the troubleshooting one like directly after the API overview in the hope that people will will go there next. It's kind of, in my mind, it's kind of roughly in the order that if you're new to the API, you should read them roughly. But it's pretty difficult there. Like, it may be better to just put them in alphabetical order and call it done.
Right. It's one of those things where it feels close enough to alphabetical, but not, I don't know. Anyways, it's like, I'd rather it just be, anyway, we can figure this out offline. It's not worth wasting cycles here for. Whatever it is, I am very excited to get this content in, and thank you for writing it.
Yeah, no problem. I'm really, and the one thing I have done here is I have checked all of the status things. These things, these are all correct as of right now, but we do need to come back and update some of these things, particularly this one.
TLS route. Yeah, that's going to be an exciting one. Yeah.
Yes. So and the other thing is a purely markdown side thing, is that when I have been changing the files, this is just a call out for everybody. I really think that we need to work on our you can't really see it because but we used to wrap our text at about 80 characters. In Markdown, but I think that we need to move to sort of wrapping it on a sentence basis, because it's way easier to read. And you don't have to spend hours reflowing a lot of text if you make edits. So what I have done here is I have only reflowed the text to sentence structure for lines that I have changed. I will do another pass at some point and go in and fix everything. But I didn't want to make the entire file change just to fix the formatting in this PR.
Yeah, no, I think that's good. Sentence seems ideal. It can be, if you have a really long sentence, splitting that up further seems okay, but just sentences max length seems reasonable to me.
Yeah, I think when Flynn tried like splitting it up on every comma or something, and it ended up looking like free verse when you're reading it, which was a bit off-putting. I think, but like it definitely was a worthwhile experiment. But yeah, I think full sentences seems to be the way to go for me.
Yeah.
I know you're probably joking, Ethan, but UDP routes, well, we are in UDP routes and TCP routes are kind of in a catch-22 situation, in that nobody is implementing them because there's no movement on them, and there's no movement on them because nobody is implementing them. So like I am hoping that I may be able to get. I actually have an open source contributor on Cilium who is interested in getting a initial support. The hardest part about TCP route and UDP route is that you cannot, if you implement TCP route and UDP route on a gateway, you cannot use a single load balancer service for all of the routes on the gateway anymore, because a single load balancer service can only have one set of backends. If you're pointing all of your backends at a proxy, that's fine. But if you are pointing them directly at backends, which you have to do for TCP route and UDP route, you can no longer use a single load balancer service to handle it. You have to use multiple and ensure they're on the same IP address somehow, or you have to do some other clever thing that involves CNI. So no, it's not like a daemon set. It's like you literally cannot have a load balancer service that has the same IP address. You can't have two load balancer services that request the same IP address unless you have something your CNI lets you do that. And you can't have more than one set of backends. And a TCP route and UDP route expect that you are using a set of endpoints as the backends. And those endpoints are necessarily going to be different to the endpoints that you're using for a proxy. If you are doing a proxy, if you are forwarding for a gateway and you're doing layer 7 or TLS stuff, then you can get away with forwarding all of those things to a single proxy and letting the proxy figure it out. But you can't do that with layer 4. You have to do other stuff. And that is one of the many reasons why TCP route and UDP route are much harder to implement. But the information I have from Cilium users is that specific functionality where people want to be able to do TCP route and UDP route on the same IP as layer 7 stuff is the reason why people want TCP route and UDP route in gateway as opposed to just using a load balancer service. That is the biggest reason why people actually want that, is they want to be able to share an IP address between multiple services, some of which are TCP or UDP and some of which are HTTP or TLS. You cannot do that with load balancer services today. Anyway, I talked a lot. Sorry.
That's great. Thank you. Yeah, thanks for running this today, Nick.
No problem. Thanks for not minding me going a couple of minutes over, everyone. Thank you all for a great first meeting for the year. As always, I probably won't see you next week because it's an awful time for me, but I look forward to reading the minutes and maybe even watching the recording. Yeah, Happy New Year, everybody, and let's keep the momentum going. Thanks, folks. See you
Happy
all
New
later.
Year. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.